Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I'm Tina Bates, and I'm honored to moderate today, to be the moderator. So thanks for joining us in this newest webinar in the Costume Society of America series, as seen at Symposium, all of which is organized by Madison Brito, who is the e-news and conversations on dress editor. So thanks to her for bringing us fascinating webinars online. Today, we will hear from two scholars on the papers that they presented at the last symposium in Salt Lake City. But before I introduce our two speakers, just a few words about myself. I was curator in history at the Canadian Museum of History from 1991 to 2012, and I was editor of the Costume Society of America's peer-reviewed journal Dress from 2014 to 2022. And at the last symposium, I presented, as you can see in this slide here, on the margins, Convict Dress at the Kingston Penitentiary. At the symposium, my primary research material for this project was a penitentiary description ledger that was dated from 1890 to 1920 that included a record for each incoming incarcerated person, including marks on the body, tattoos, and a mugshot, so that the authorities could identify repeat offenders. The mugshots show the street clothes the men were wearing when arrested, and next slide will show the penitentiary uniform, and the next slide again. So my thesis is that despite the control those in power placed on their bodies, the men found ways to insert their sense of identity. Okay, thank you for the slides. Now, for the main act. The thing I love about our field of fashion and dress is that it is so interdisciplinary. It can cover any period, any social setting, any research materials or data from many different viewpoints. Our two speakers today are examples of their interdisciplinarity. Their papers are so different, yet both focus on the theme of identity, which is so critical to our field. So it is my pleasure to introduce our two speakers. Ginger Stanciel is the Programming, Engagement, and Exhibition Development Coordinator for Civic Projects Architecture in Chicago. Some of her exhibition and programming projects include the Obama Presidential Center Museum and the Museum of Science and Industry, Chicago. She completed her master's degree at Iowa State University, studying apparel, merchandising, and design, with an emphasis on museum studies, that's close to my own heart, and fashion history. Ginger received her Bachelor of Arts in Fashion Design from Kent State University. She presented two works at the symposium. The one is Dress, Power, and Identity in Italian Renaissance Portraiture, as well as This Uniform Doesn't Mean Anything, Black World War II Soldiers, Uniforms, and Racial Discrimination in the United States. So our second speaker is Jo Jenkinson. She's a reader and deputy head at the Manchester Fashion Institute, Manchester Metropolitan University, UK. Her research examines dress, gender, and youth culture, the lived experience of young people, and how dress relates to identity formation, but also memories of youth and how youth lives with us through dress and music. I can attest to that. Jo works collaboratively across disciplines using creative methods that position dress as a conduit or method through which new narratives are told. She's a member of the Manchester Centre for Youth Studies, founder of the Portrait Youth Project, and co-founder on the Arts and Humanities Research Council funded network, Locating Menswear. Jo presented Dandy Style and Portrait Youth at the symposium.
Hello, as she introduced me, my name is Ginger Stanciel, and I'll be talking about my presentation, Dress, Portraiture, and Identity. Right. So in an effort to further explore how aristocratic Renaissance women expressed identity, I critically analyzed the painted portraits of Italian-born or married wives and mistresses from the circa 16th century. I selected portraiture of the following 9 women to analyze: Eleonora di Toledo, Caterina Sforza, Bianca Maria Sforza, Lucrezia Borgia, Isabella d'Este, Margherita Pillaggio, Cecilia Galiani, Bianca Capello, and Giulia Farnese. And here are the portraiture that I analyzed for each of these women. So after conducting my portrait analysis of the 9 women and 21 portraits, I identified these key 8 themes, which I'll go into detail about. The use of dress to reference status appeared most prominently when conveying wealth, marital status, and status as a ruler. For women like Bianca Capello and Bianca Maria Sforza, depicted here, establishing all 3 of these identities would have been exceptionally important due to the large social position leaps they made within their lives. Bianca Maria Sforza, a notable duke's daughter, married and would become the Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, while Bianca Capello was a mistress that married her lover and became the Grand Duchess of Tuscany. Religious references appeared in several of the portraits with direct allegorical references, indirect symbolism, and political references to Catholicism and the Catholic Church. Caterina Sforza, depicted here, is depicted as St. Catherine. More subtle references appeared in the portraits in the form of flowers, other objects typically associated with specific saints, the color red in connections to the Catholic Church, and then the most common reference to the Catholic Church being the presence of rosaries and crucifixes. A few women exhibited the concept of purity through symbolism, such as wearing pearls, while Lucrezia Borgia, pictured here, Giulia Farnese, and Caterina Sforza each convey these characteristics in more overt ways. Each of these 3 women lived heavily controversial lives that garnered them tarnished reputations. As such, each are depicted in dress styles that are both conservative for the period and not fitting their respective social statuses at the time, all in favor of presenting a curated identity of piety, purity, and humility. Eleonora di Toledo, depicted here, and Bianca Maria Sforza most notably utilized dress to reference their heritage or home region, as both experienced to move away from their home culture and country after their marriages. Eleonora di Toledo was known throughout her time in Florence for favoring alla spagnola dress, and this dress style is present in several of her portraits. Bianca Maria Sforza, depicted here, and Isabella d'Este each suggested affiliation with the House of Sforza by wearing Clozonia braids and ferinieri, respectively, in at least one of their portraits. Both dress elements connected Beatrice d'Este, Duchess of Milan, and speak to the broader influence Milanese style had throughout Italy during this period, and to the tight ties between the d'Este and Sforza families, communicated in subtle ways through dress. While referencing their birth family and home regions was a prominent feature in the dress identity of many of these women, referencing the cultural dress styles of their husband's region was also a common theme. Bianca Maria Sforza and Eleonora di Toledo's portraiture highlight the difference in the adaptation of their husband's cultural dress. While Eleonora appears to adapt alla spagnola later in her marriage as a means to initially win over the Florentine people, Bianca Maria was at the Habsburg court for over a year wearing Milanese fashions before adopting Austro-German dress. Subvert direct references to women's romantic partners and husbands can be found in the background elements and non-dress related objects within some of the women's portraiture. Cecilia Galiani, seen here, famously holds a white ermine over her heart as a less direct reference to her lover Ludovico Sforza, who is colloquially known as Ermiliano Bianco, or white ermine, during this time. Caterina Sforza was likely the woman with the largest lack of traditional symbolism amongst her portraits, which can honestly be attributed to her personality and the life she lived, having been quoted by Machiavelli as stating that she did not care that her children had been kidnapped and were being held for ransom in exchange for her territories. She replied she could always have more children and refused to surrender. Dissimilarly, more traditionally leaning women like Bianca Maria Sforza, Bianca Capello, and Margherita Plagio, depicted here, lack fertility motifs in their portraits commissioned during the early years of their marriage, when such symbolism would be expected. Each of these 9 women embodied many of the period expectations of mothers, wives, mistresses, and rulers. However, all of them found ways to communicate their personal identities through dress in their portraits during their lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ginger. And now for something completely different. Moving forward over 500 years to the present, we have Jo Jenkinson to give an overview of the paper that she presented at the latest symposium.
Thank you, and great to hear about your work, Tina, and Ginger's as well, because they were 2 of my favourite papers at the conference. And there's lots of commonalities. I'm Jo, and I'm going to talk about my paper, which was called Dandy Style and Portrait Youth, and that was about a collaboration between my project Portrait Youth, which I'll talk about, and the Dandy Style exhibition at the Manchester Art Gallery last year. So Portrait Youth is a project that I've run since 2017. It aims to document narratives of youth through styling and dress. And our mission really, as we set out, was to use the language of fashion and dress to talk to young people in the region and find out what mattered to them. This collaboration with the Dandy Style exhibition was with the Proud Trust, which is a local LGBTQ plus group who are just around the corner from the University of Manchester. So the methodology for Wear Your Identity, and this is really interesting, Tina, because we used Irving Goffman's idea of identity kits, which of course started out looking at people, institutions, and the importance of dress and identity. And we applied that idea of dress as an identity kit to this project, asking young people to pull together not just items of clothing, but also any sort of artifacts or things that matter to them that we then use for a styling and photo shoot workshop. So what this project does is it positions dress as a method through which young people can communicate. So what I love about this project is it's a truly collaborative project. As I say, it's been running for 5 years. We've worked with lots of different photographers in lots of different venues, lots of different youth groups and collaborative partners, and most importantly, over 100 young people in the northwest of England. So, and they tend to be aged between about 16 and 24 maximum years old. So it's been a really exciting project, and it continues. Some of these collaborations are shown here. We've worked with young autistic people. We've worked with a group that were working with girls who are at risk of being involved in gangs. We worked with the Proud Trust previously and displayed those images through the city during the Pride weekend, which was really exciting. We've also worked with the British Muslim Heritage Centre and also with the CP company, the Italian sportswear company, with a group of young men as part of an exhibition they did just outside Manchester. So it's a really exciting project. We were asked to join the team really for Dandy Style, which was an exhibition at Manchester Art Gallery in the UK. It was a really important exhibition led by Dr. Sean Cole and Miles Lambert from the gallery. They had been working on this a really long time. It had been interrupted because of COVID, but it finally happened in 2022, get my years right. And it was a major exhibition on men's style in the UK, running at the same time, interestingly, as the V&A show as well in London. So what they asked us to do, because they were aware that the exhibition it also used a lot of portraiture and art as alongside the garments, was to bring the Portrait Youth project into the gallery. So as part of the Dandy Style exhibition, we had a room just to the side of the gallery where we had run this workshop with a group of trans youth from the Proud Trust, and those images were shown in the gallery as part of the exhibition. And what was really lovely is they had their own space, their own room as part of the gallery that they could also kind of own and hang out in. And what's important about this, I think, is that idea of who's invited into gallery spaces, who the audience is. You know, in a major exhibition about menswear, it's quite special, I think, to have the voice of young people in there who are largely absent, but also the voice of young trans men, particularly, who would obviously not normally be included in sort of classical menswear exhibitions. So that was really important to us extending that audience. So I'm going to quickly whip through some of the findings, but obviously we've got we can talk about those as the evening goes on. But you know, we found dress to be a really important way of young people expressing themselves and their identities. And by young people, we're talking about that sort of 16 to 25 year age group, but also that started young. And again, with this particular group, really young, working out quite early that something about their clothing could affect how they felt and impacted on their relationship with their body and their identity. It also questioned what we might mean by everyday dress. You know, for these young people, this was everyday dress, whatever they were wearing, but also they all identified how quite often everyday dress is missing from galleries and exhibitions. They talked a lot about fitting in, you know, maybe because they don't want to be bullied, or maybe they're concerned about being misgendered in this group, and also that sort of attachment to clothing. So I love this, you know, the idea of having a favourite pair of pants that they wore all the time, but particularly in this instance because they found them to be really affirming and gender affirming. But it's not always just about the garments themselves, this idea of how you style clothes or self-style clothes. And again, in this group, you know, they were using styling to perhaps, in this example, hide the chest or kind of manipulate how they were seen. We also, of course, because we were part of the Dandy Style exhibition, we asked them and the audience who filled out postcards in the exhibition through the whole duration to define what sort of dandy meant to them. And that was interesting in this age group. This participant sort of went straight to Oscar Wilde. And actually, it was really interesting to hear about how they kind of translate that idea of dandy into their generation. And we also asked them to define menswear, you know, and this is really interesting. It was a really interesting conversation for us at a time when there's so many conversations about gender or non-gender in fashion. So we were very interested to hear from this group on that aspect. And actually, you know, menswear for them was really important. It was really important to them to be able to shop in a menswear store, you know, and actually buy clothes that are labelled as menswear, which is, again, interesting when so many of our students and so much discussion is around sort of non-gendering of fashion. I'm just ending quickly with, I think Tina mentioned I'm part of the Locating Menswear network, and all of this has fed through into a network that I'm part of, looking at those gaps in menswear, such as this group, and how we might kind of look at that collaboratively going forward.
Well, thank you so much, Jo. Thank both of you for such interesting case studies. You have taken, I think the people who are viewing this will realize these are very diverse topics, but you made them both so meaningful, whether it's identity and portraiture from the Renaissance to the present day, whether youth or adults, and certainly a variety of genders. So all the paper, including mine, are about what and how dress communicates, which is what we do, don't we? I have a couple of questions. A question for Ginger, which is, I wondered how you chose the 21 portraits that you worked with.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So a lot of it, I graduated in 2022, so I was doing my master's degree. This is from my master's thesis. I was doing a lot of my research and doing this during COVID, unfortunately. So I started in fall 2020 with this research when, as most of us know, we weren't really traveling to Europe or going much of anywhere at that point. So a lot of my research was based on, first, I wanted to identify what women I wanted to research. And part of that was kind of uplifting unrepresented voices. So when I was narrowing it down, I was kind of like, okay, like who do I want to talk about that hasn't really gotten as much of a platform in research? And so One of the early people I kind of took off the list was Catherine de Medici. She's very, like, as a French queen, she's been written about or examined a lot. And so from there, then I narrowed it down to accessibility of portraits, honestly, if I'm being honest, because I'm working digitally because of COVID and I couldn't actually go to museums and see things. It was a lot of checking museum databases, European arts databases of who had high quality images of the portraits that I was analyzing. And from there I narrowed it down. And then there was also the kind of narrowing it down to portraits that were actually like credited of this is widely believed by scholars to be this person. And then also dated and having all this extra information that I could actually analyze. I did end up kind of, I guess, dropping some portraits from my original starting list, just because when I was looking at several portraits of like one woman, there are like two of them that you're kind of like, okay, these look really, really, really similar and are by the same artist. So I kind of felt like it's redundant to analyze two portraits by the same artist from the exact same time period that are almost identical.
Okay, thank you. We have a question in the chat. Thank you for such brilliant talks. I have a question for Ginger. Did you come across cases where these women wore menswear? What were the events that would lead to this, if so?
So almost all the women weren't wearing menswear, just due to the point that we're talking about 15th, 16th century, and these women were of a higher class. So even if they were to wear more menswear leaning certain garments for practical reasons, it wouldn't be practical for them due to their social status. One example, I think the closest to kind of getting to your question, so Lucrezia Borgia, the portrait of her, that was kind of identified in an Australian collection. And a lot of it took a long time to figure out that that was her, just because of, I kind of talked about how the garments she was wearing and the lack of adornment kind of threw people off the scent, as it were. And her haircut as well was very short in that. So that's kind of the closest we get to kind of menswear. And that's more or less of like intentional, like she's dressed like a man, and more of kind of leaning towards that more religious aspect of humility, piety, and just like simplicity, which was really preached during certain periods of the Renaissance, when you're starting to kind of get away from the Catholic Church's kind of very exorbitant, flashy aspects kind of around the turn of the 1500s into 1600s.
Okay, I have one more question for you, Ginger. For example, you said the carnation represented love and marriage, and then you mentioned pearls and other things, and I wondered how you found out what those things really meant to the people at the time.
Yeah, so what was really cool and really interesting, I had so much fun. I genuinely had so much fun doing this research because I'm a big history nerd and art history nerd. And there's so much literature and research already done about symbolism within Renaissance paintings specifically. And I kind of learned a little bit about this when I was an undergrad. I took an art history class in Italy, and getting to see and experience the kind of, it fascinated me the way in which so many artists would embed little things, aspects of symbolism to mean something. So carnation specifically, like there's whole books about symbolism of flowers in art, which is very fascinating. Some people might not be fascinating. I thought it was really cool that just having a flower that just looks pretty in a painting could have such significant meaning and implications.
Are you ever going to get to see these portraits in their museums?
I actually did. So I went, so one of the Eleanor di Toledo paintings by Bronzino, I had seen that when I was an undergrad in Italy. And then a lot of portraits that I was looking at were at the Uffizi galleries in Florence, Italy. So I went on a trip with my family directly after graduation for a few weeks. And so I got to see 4 of the portraits I analyzed in the Uffizi galleries, and my family took pictures of me going like,
Great. That's great. Okay, I have a question for Joe. All that rich material that was collected for the project, the identity kits, the interviews, and the portraits, how are they preserved? Are they is an archive formed and kept somewhere?
That's a really good question. I wish I'd thought about that when I started, because I started in 2017 thinking I'd work with one group, and it snowballed, and then someone else wanted to do it, and so it's grown into something much bigger. So I didn't go into it with that intention, but we have, I'd say we've done about nine different groups of young people now, but not a series of about nine. In the last 5 or so, I have been collecting that permission to archive. We can archive it at the university, we just can't necessarily archive it for public use. But I mean, I suppose our ambition really would be to do a kind of group exhibition, or some kind of publication that enables us to do that and pull it all together at some point.
So, and where is this material kept?
Currently at the university. Yeah,
Okay.
currently it's still
It's
in.
archive.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
data is just stored, and I think also because it's young people, we have quite tight ethical procedures on what we can do with it.
Yeah.
So that is quite strict. So, and that's great, that's how it should be. But obviously, we've written about it and we've got more writing to do and more publications around it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so that should be good. I mean, yeah, there's always a long list.
There is a
Yeah.
question for you in the chat. Would it be possible to elaborate on the gaps in the menswear that you mentioned? Is there a need for a more gender fluid approach to menswear, or is the category going more in the direction of the binary?
That's a good question. And I think, in terms of the gaps, I think my research is all about talking to people. And I think the gap is talking to real people about their experience quite often. But often when you also, traditionally, when you look at the sort of these exhibitions of male dress, it's quite often white, male, middle class, adults. So there are lots of gaps. There's lots of gaps in the history. Like I know in British menswear, there's lots of gaps in history about sort of the diaspora, people who came over to the UK, different ways of dressing. There's a really great exhibition on at the moment in London about black fashion, for example, and again, lots of new stories, lots of hidden narratives, things we haven't heard before. So I think there's always gaps. And I think one of the biggest gaps is also that idea of sort of everyday dress, not the spectacular or the things that were preserved, but maybe those other things that, people held dear that aren't always deemed worthy of collections. So for me, they're the gaps. In terms of, is there a need for a more gender fluid approach to menswear? I think there is a need for that awareness for sure, and I think everything's moving, finally a bit more in that direction. But then, as I say, I think with this group, the kind of menswear category was very important to them as well. As a trans group, they actually held on quite tightly to that idea of menswear being menswear. So, so I think it's important to think about sort of gender fluidity, but also I think it's still okay to talk about menswear, as well for what it is. And we did also say when we entered into this, and we talk about this in all of the menswear projects we're involved in, is menswear is up to the individual to define. Menswear can be worn by a woman, when menswear can be a dress, menswear can be, it's up to that individual to define what it means to them.
You mentioned the exhibition about black fashion in London. Where is that?
Yeah, that's at Somerset House.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were there any obstacles that you encountered during the workshops where someone didn't like the approach, or talking about menswear, that they didn't like the idea of menswear?
Yeah, that's interesting. In that group, not so much. Nobody has ever found the workshop unsettling, which is great. Have to say though that every time I'm doing a workshop on Saturday, I'm nervous. I don't sleep for the week before, because the worst thing that could happen is that somebody doesn't like the images, or they find it stressful. So we're very careful to prepare any participants in advance, to make arrangements for slightly different situations, such as less people or whatever people might need to accommodate it and make it a good experience for them. So it is always the most nerve-wracking thing. And we obviously wouldn't exhibit any images that people are unhappy with. We always do run it past them first. So I think they have a lot of agency in the process, which is really important.
Ginger, what made you pursue this project, the portraiture of the 1500s?
So it's not a long story, but a dear to my heart story. So I was an undergrad. I was lucky enough to study abroad in Florence, Italy twice. And I was under the tutelage of a fantastic art history professor. And we had classes. Our classes were held very rarely in the classroom, but more often than not in the actual galleries looking at the portraits. And so getting that experience at 18 and then again at 20, and then having traveled to Europe and art museums and everything growing up with my family, once I decided to go to grad school, my family knew before I did that my research would be in this realm. And so when I'm like, I figured out what I want to do my thesis on, I figured out what my research focus is going to be. And like, it's going to be the Italian Renaissance portraiture. Everyone's kind of like, yeah, we kind of already knew that was what it was going to be. So it was definitely very much a full circle moment of going to fashion school, doing all these things, getting to travel and explore, and then going to Iowa State. And I knew exactly what I wanted to research. I knew exactly what time period I was fascinated with, and passionate about.
What did you do? The Obama Presidential Center Museum and the Museum of Science and Industry.
Yeah, of course. So I'm still working on the Obama project. The long story short is I am a consultant for a consultant, but I get to do a lot of kind of digital curation, digital collections management work. I get to do a lot of caption editing, script writing, editing. I get to do some of everything and a lot of everything. And the project, we can officially now say, the museum will be open to the public in the fall of 2025. So I will be grinding the work pavement until then. And for the Museum of Science and Industry, my firm and some other firms, we did some work with the Museum of Science and Industry's education department, basically. And we were, a civic project got hired to engage with the community surrounding the museum and kind of figure out what the communities needed from the museum, like how the museum could serve the community rather than the community serve the museum, which was really interesting work. We got to go to a lot of community engagement, go to farmers markets, local events, that kind of thing, and just ask local residents of kind of what would you like to see them do for your community? How would you like them to engage with you more? Which was really fulfilling and exciting work to see a large institution like that having an actual interest and passion in hearing from local people that may not necessarily be able to afford the $20 ticket to visit the museum all the time.
Well, I've been through all the changes that museums have gone through in the last several decades, and it is absolutely remarkable how different it is today in terms of reaching new audiences and giving agency to the people who come to the museum, and not just the curators like ourselves telling them something. They can also tell us something, and I really felt that was the case with your project, Joe. I think you said that you learned a lot from the youth that you talked to in the interviews and everything else, but also the youth really learned a lot about themselves in articulating their sense of identity.
Yeah, and I think because we had like a postcard wall where we asked, a series of questions, that's always really lovely. And we spent a really nice sort of day in the gallery when it had closed, going through them all. There were hundreds and hundreds. But I think what was really special was the way the gallery had set it up that the young people could kind of own the space. So they were kind of hanging out in there, or they could go there if they'd gone into town on a Saturday afternoon with some friends, and there was a sofa, and they could sit where their portraits were and kind of own it a little bit. And I think that's really important because, you know, a lot of them felt quite uncomfortable at the opening night because it was busy, it was full of people that were not their people they wouldn't normally mix with. But so it enabled them to sort of take a little bit of ownership back of their part of the exhibition, which I think is really important. And you know, it does bring in new audiences because they were bringing their friends in, and you know, all of this. So it does change things.
Just another question, Joe, in the chat, what attitudes did the youth that you worked with have toward the museum when you first started this whole project?
I think with this group, they were actually, because the Proud Trust do such an amazing job, it's a group for young people in Manchester that do so many projects, so many different things. I think they were quite used to being out about in the city, being invited to things. But we have worked with other groups for whom, I mean, they just would never in a million years think their work would be exhibited. And that can change everything, you know. So I think these young people had probably been in museums, had probably, you know, at different occasions, still absolutely astounded that their image was so large in an exhibition. But I think they were used to it. But we have definitely worked with groups where that's not the case, and that's one of the most special things about the project.
And I guess you could say this project also maybe made a lifelong affinity for that youth for museums.
Yeah.
You know, or at least
yeah.
they might have some critical stance on what a museum should be, which would be pretty cool. There's another question here for Ginger, perhaps a little off topic, but could you talk a bit about the symbolism of pearls in the portraits that you studied?
Yeah, of course. So again, we're talking about women that are very wealthy women. And pearls, as they are similar to now, they're very expensive and very rare. And the concept of white purity, like that idea still existed as early as that time period. So the concept of purity and kind of almost unattainable wealth and extravagance. So that was definitely that kind of, if you had white pearls on, you were very wealthy. And typically along the lines of like, if you were an unmarried woman, that would be something you wanted to be associated with wealth and purity, as in actually virginal purity, and as well as the kind of concept of tying back to the Catholic Church, Catholicism, and the idea that you were supposed to be pure before you're married.
Yes, what a combo. Wealth and purity, you know.
Yeah.
Get better than that. Okay. So Joe, how did this project with youth and dress just start? Where did the idea come from?
I think it came from because for my PhD I interviewed older people about their youth. So I was interviewing older women about the youth, and I was in the middle of all of that, doing these interviews, and using a lot of things, using garments, soundtracks, sort of again kind of material methods to talk to these women about their youth. And I think it just struck me that it might be a good idea to talk to some young people rather than always being retrospective, because I thought it would be interesting to capture it now. So that's where it started, really. And we did it as a one-off. We did it in 2017 as a sort of first go with a youth group called Manchester Youth Council. And as I say, it just snowballed from there, really, because then we had other groups that came to us and said, can you do it? Can we do it? So it became something bigger than we ever expected, really. Yes, I mean, sort of, you know, look at the temporal thing of, you know, as you get older, looking back, and when you're younger, looking forward, and what you imagine you might be wearing or doing when you're older.
Well, it's interesting because I did identify when you said that it's the memory of youth and dress, of course, but also music, because I played guitar in my 20s, and I took it up again and you know, the music that I knew from my 20s, I took it up again when I retired in 2012. So yeah, I can't say though that I wore miniskirts again once I'd retired. So where is it now? Do you plan, or have you ever worked with older people about their dress at that time? Well, I think you talked about that was your PhD project.
That's right. Yeah. So that's where it started, to be honest.
Okay.
And I'm kind of tempted to do that again. I think it's also really lovely, but it is very different looking at it from that perspective of memory to lived experience.
Okay, so I just want to say that this has been just fascinating. Two very different speakers, two very different papers, two very different projects. And I just want to thank you so much, Joe and Ginger, for being part of this, this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be part of it.
And thank you for everyone for coming.